Hi everyone. I hope you can hear me. I hope you can see me okay. We had a slight tech malfunction. Facebook is not the most reliable platform for reliable technology. So I'm going solo today. I'm not doing a two-way with Sally. And what's going to happen, I'm just going to tag Sally in the comments, and then Sally's going to be basically asking you questions. So this is a one-woman show, so to speak. If you have any questions, please just drop them in. Please just drop them in the comments below. That's my partner leaving the room. So yes, I am a sex coach and clinical sexologist. And today I'm going to be answering your questions around sex and anxiety. That's a big topic to cover, especially as when it comes to sex and anxiety, whether you have clinical anxiety, whether you've been diagnosed with anxiety, or people tend to feel very anxious in the bedroom. So I'm going to be answering a lot of questions and basically talking about sex and anxiety. Hi Derek. I'm just going to see if I can tag Sally in the comments. Okay. Please, oh shit, nope, cancel, whoops. Please excuse the, pardon my French by the way, please excuse the tech hiccups while we were trying to sort this out today. Hello Bradley, hi Rachel, and hi Derek. If you don't know me, I spoke at Inspiring Talks Brighton back in August, I think, on why a great relationship doesn't always mean a great sex life. So you can check out that video on YouTube if you want to catch what I was talking about, just to learn a bit more about how I work. I work in private practice with clients in Brighton, Eastbourne, and also people further afield. So basically I help people with sexual concerns, whether they're single, in a couple. I work with them either on their own or with couples. So I think in the next few minutes, I guess I'll start talking about sex and anxiety and how I came to know a lot about that. So I'll just wait a few more minutes. Hi Derek, no worries. You'll be able to catch this video. It will be on the replay after I finish this live. Let me just check my phone for notifications. Cool. So I think I'll start now, seeing as this was supposed to start at 11 AM and due to the tech stuff going on. So Sally has sent me the first question. So how I came to be a clinical sexologist. That's a really interesting question because it's not really a standard career. It's not really something that you think that you want to do at school necessarily. It's not something they tell you about in Careers Day. You know, I grew up very religious. I was a very good girl growing up, and then after a period of illness, I think a lot of people can relate to that. I knew I wanted to do something I was passionate about, and I guess I was doing my own personal healing, healing mind, body, emotion, spirit. And obviously sexuality came into that as well, because often if you grow up in a religious household, and generally if you grow up in a religious community, it's not very sex positive at all. So I had to do a lot of my own healing around sexuality. And then I knew I wanted to do more work within this. So I was looking at various training programs. And then I met my mentors 3 years ago, and I really resonated with their message. I resonated with their work. And so I thought, fuck it. Life is too short not to do something you're passionate about. And I'd rather try and do something I'm passionate about rather than do something I'm not. So I took their training. I got my certification last year. I also work for them, and since doing my training I've done other ongoing training programs. I've been to conferences, and just the world of sexology, and sexology is a real field of study. It's not just something made up. It's something that really fascinates me. It's something that I could learn about all day. There's always new stuff coming out. I think it's a very, very important topic because we are all affected by sex, even if we're not sexually active or feel particularly sexual. And I guess that's how I got into it, really. The training I did, there are not many graduates from my training program within the UK. A lot of my colleagues are in the US, but my training was very focused on kind of collaborating with other professionals. So I have a lot of other colleagues who are psychosexual therapists or sex therapists or tantric body workers, and I wanted to kind of I wanted to straddle both worlds, so I'm glad that I had the academic training and also the more holistic side as well. I'm also the organizer of Brighton Sexuality Professionals, so we are a collective of different people who work with sexuality, whether we're therapists, coaches, body workers, tantrikas, prodoms. I wanted to make it sex worker friendly as well. And that's going really well so far. So I guess that's how I got to being a clinical sexologist. Doesn't make it doesn't make dinner parties dull. So I had a huge sexual appetite in my 20s. My parents were very uncommunicative. Yeah, I felt the same when I was a teenager. I thought there was something very wrong with me for having sexual fantasies. I thought I was somehow dirty or damaged. And a lot of people that I work with, sexual shame has a huge part to play in that. One thing that I do when I work with clients is I do a sexual history form. I'm just going to take a sip of water because it's really warm in here. So one thing I do with clients is I take a sexual history, and I want them to know, I want to find out what were their childhood messages around sexuality, what were your parents, what were your caregivers telling you about sex, what was your religious community telling you about sex, because even if you consciously reject it now and think, nope, I don't believe that, it's still there unconsciously. And if you think that most of us received terrible sex education, if we received any at all, that sex education or lack of sex education, it wasn't going to equip us to have happy, enjoyable, pleasurable sexual experiences as adults. So I think a lot of people can relate to either having very conservative parents or having parents who just didn't say anything at all. And that was also a message, because even if it wasn't an explicit message, it was still just don't talk about it. Sex is shameful, sex is dirty. And then some people grew up with very tolerant and liberal parents, which you're very lucky if you did. But even if you grew up with very tolerant and liberal parents, there's still these societal messages about sexuality that will infiltrate and get into your unconscious. So we need to be mindful of what messages we receive around sexuality, what messages we give to our kids about sexuality, what the implicit and explicit messages are about sex and sexuality. It may not be, the messages may not be that sex is wrong, so to speak. But one thing I find very interesting when I get to talking to people about my work and about sexual concerns is that often the first thing that a lot of people will jump to is sexual exploitation and abuse. And I find that very interesting, because while unfortunately realizing how common sexual abuse is, it's kind of an interesting correlation that people unconsciously associate sex with something unpleasant and something abusive. And I think that's worth keeping in mind, our kind of automatic assumptions about sexuality. I'm very aware that I'm using a Facebook Live, and Facebook has recently released new terms of service, community guidelines called sexual solicitation, where you're not allowed to talk about sex. They're trying to stamp out people looking for hookups online, but they've made it very restrictive about what people can post. But you can still post freely about sexual exploitation. And so it's okay to talk about sex in a negative context, but to talk about it in a positive context, that's still very taboo. Generally, we live in a culture that's very taboo around sexual pleasure. So it's something to be very mindful of, that it's okay to talk about sex in a negative context, that it's dangerous, it's dirty, it's wrong, but then we can't talk about it in a pleasurable context. So just be mindful of that and how that's affecting your attitudes towards sex. What stifles a great sex life? Yeah, not saying anything, it's awful. It's very interesting that, you know, recently in the UK, last year, they changed the law to make relationship and sex education compulsory in schools. They still haven't agreed on a national curriculum for that. But in a lot of sex education in classrooms, it's very interesting that they want to talk about the dangers of sex. But if you're telling people constantly how dangerous sex is, does that mean we have a very positive attitude towards sex? If you're being told from various places that sex is dangerous, it's wrong, it's dirty, then how is that going to impact how you show up in the bedroom with your partner? Is that going to make you think very positively about sex? Are you going to look forward to going to bed? Or are you going to have this unconscious thing of, this is wrong, it's dirty? It's kind of along the lines of, if you constantly tell yourself that chocolate is bad, that chocolate is wrong, that chocolate is the worst thing in the world, and yet chocolate's also very delicious, then how is that going to impact your relationship with chocolate? Is then that going to give you a healthy relationship with chocolate where you can eat it in moderation and you can enjoy it? Or is that going to give you a lot of shame around eating chocolate? I find it very interesting that when we talk about sexual dysfunction, a lot of us in my field, we believe that the root cause of a lot of sexual concerns is sexual shame. Shame around sexuality, shame around your body, shame around how you experience your gender. I think sexual shame permeates so much of how we feel about ourselves. And if we get to the root of that and work with sexual shame, that will really help with many, many sexual concerns. I'm going to go through these lists of questions. So what stifles a great sex life? Okay, you need to book a few sessions with me. What stifles a great sex life? If I was to boil that down to a few main points, number one, sexual shame. Number one, sexual shame. So if you are feeling embarrassed around your body, if you feel uncomfortable with your body, if you don't feel comfortable nude, if you're not comfortable with your genitals, there's a lot of genital shame that people experience as well. If you're not comfortable with the way your genitals look, how they feel, how they smell, how they taste, how they touch, that's going to impact how you show up in the bedroom. Another huge stifler of great sex life is communication. We are terrible at communicating about sex, and in terms of talking about it in a non-salacious way. A case in point, if you are cooking a meal with your partner and you're going to cook the most amazing Thai green curry, but you have no recipe, you haven't decided who's doing what, you haven't really discussed this beforehand about what ingredients you need to buy, or whether you've got enough rice, or whether you need to clean the hob or not, and you're not going to communicate with each other while you cook the meal, then how are you meant to create an enjoyable, delicious, tasty meal? Another thing is when you have friends around for dinner and you're going to cook a steak, for example, or if you're vegan, if you're going to cook the most amazing cauliflower dish, and you don't want to ask, normally we ask our friends, so how do you like your steak? Or how do you like your cauliflower? How do you like your broccoli? How do you like your tofu? We like to know how the people we love, how they think, what they like about food, and what their preference is. But then with sex, we just automatically expect our partners to know. No, it doesn't generally work like that. That even if at first, if you are having the most amazing sex life and connection, it will peter off after a while if you don't know how to communicate. I think this comes down to anxiety as well, because this is the anxiety compass, and a lot of us experience anxiety around sexuality because we think we have to perform a certain way, and we think we have to act a certain way, and it can be very anxiety provoking to actually talk about sex, and it can feel very, very scary to actually say, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, can you do it more like this, can I have some of this, can we try this instead? It can feel very vulnerable, and it can feel very scary, because and underneath it there's still that shame that's there. I think that when we, especially women or people who are socialized as women, a lot of women are very scared of becoming slutty or appearing slutty, and that they are scared of asking for what they want for a fear of appearing slutty. And at the same time, for men or people socialized as men, men tend to feel a lot of performance anxiety in terms of I've got to be able to stay hard for an hour, and I've got to be able to satisfy, and I've got to make her come. And then men can feel incredibly inadequate if they feel they're not doing a good job. Again, it comes down to performance. It comes down to, how do I look? Do I have to look like a porn star? Do I look sexy enough? Am I pleasing my partner enough? I work with clients who are very paranoid about how they appear with their partners, and they want to please their partners. And this is both men and women. And I wish I could sort of get men and women to communicate more that we're both very anxious, that we want to please our partners. And we're so anxious about pleasing our partners, and that affects how we feel in the bedroom and affects how we show up in the bedroom. So I'm just going to scroll down. Yep, what you repress ends up motivating you. I'm just going to take another sip of water. There are lots of interesting statistics. So within my field, there's a bit of, well, there's controversy about lots of things, but there's one controversy about the term of sex addiction and whether it is a real medical terminology or how we treat it. And I'm not really a fan of the term sex addiction. But one of my mentors, Dominic Davis, he believes that it's not sex addiction we should be treating, it's sexual shame we should be treating, because often at the root of out of control sexual behavior is a sense of shame. And there's some interesting statistics that they noticed a correlation. So when it comes to sex addiction or porn addiction, so to speak, there was a very interesting correlation. They noticed that the rate of distress around porn addiction was in direct proportion to how religious the person was. So often if somebody's very religious, they believe that porn is something shameful and disgusting and dirty. And some statistics have noticed that the more religious they noticed a person was, the more distress they noticed around porn usage. Whereas if somebody wasn't as religious, they didn't seem to be as distressed about porn usage. So it's an interesting thing to notice that when you are suppressing something, when you believe that something is shameful, when you have this belief that some certain sexual activity or behavior is shameful and disgusting, or you must push it down, the more it's going to motivate you in other ways. So I'm going to scroll down here. Oopsie, my computer's being a bit slow. Yeah, fantasy analogy. I'm curious about evidence outside the bedroom we might see in our lives that shows... Sorry. So Derek says, I'm curious about what evidence outside of the bedroom we might see in our lives that shows dysfunctional, negative sexual beliefs. Can you go into a bit more detail with that, Derek? 'Cause I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. One thing I'm thinking of is if we go back to absolute basics as to how comfortable we feel talking about sex in general. Do we feel comfortable talking about sex with our friends? Do we feel comfortable talking about sex with new partners? And by I mean talking about sex, not just as in dirty talk, so to speak, or as in bragging about it, but actually talking about it and saying, I'm feeling a bit uncomfortable about my penis at the moment, or this is what I really like in bed, this is what I prefer. I'm a bit worried about whether I'm ejaculating too soon. It depends how comfortable you feel talking about sex, because generally the less comfortable people feel talking about sex in general, the more shame they feel around talking about sex in the bedroom and showing up sexually in the bedroom. I also think so. Realize it should dysfunctional negative sexual beliefs. Something I'm thinking of is when I saw something very interesting earlier. This morning I was scrolling through Facebook because I'm addicted to Facebook sometimes. Addicted, that's a very interesting word. And I came across an article by BuzzFeed. I don't know if you follow BuzzFeed at all. There's some really cool articles, and it was an article about a sex toy called the Satisfier, and how it's amazing and women are loving it, and how so many women are really enjoying it. And then you open the comments section, and the comment sections of anything on Facebook is always very interesting. And a lot of people were saying, wow, this is amazing. And some other people were saying, this is disgusting, this is bad, this is shameful. Why are we talking about this on Facebook? That's an interesting thing to take notice of. Often when you see people disapproving of some things around sexuality, you need to be mindful of where's that coming from. I mean, I want to get a balance here, because on one hand, I'm not really a fan of seeing very over-sexualized music videos, for example, but at the same time, talking about things like sexual pleasure still seems to be very taboo. So when it comes to identifying negative beliefs around sexuality, if you notice that you or somebody else is getting a very strong reaction around seeing stuff around sexual pleasure, be mindful of that. I'm gonna scroll down. What about... Yeah, it's as Sally said, it's a conflict around behavior that causes dysfunction or addiction. There's a really interesting book that I love recommending to people. It's called Perv by Jesse Bering, and it talks about how often it's distress around certain sexual behaviors that causes the most distress rather than the behavior itself. So Derek, how does our relationship with sex manifest in other areas of our lives? Good question. So there's an idea that what if your sexual energy was also your life force energy or your creative energy? If you are someone who believes in kind of spirituality, or someone who has done yoga before, and you think about the concept of the chakras, they believe that the sacral chakra, which is the source of creativity, is also the place of sexuality and sexual energy. I know a woman who is a naturopath, and a few people who believe that in Ayurvedic medicine, your libido is like your the barometer of how healthy you are and your life force energy. That's one idea. I'm not saying that that is necessarily accurate. Relationship to sex. I'm thinking when it comes to also our relationship to sex, it comes to our relationship to our bodies and our relationship to pleasure. I talk about pleasure a lot because I love talking about pleasure. And when I have clients coming to me, and when I work with my clients and they're coming with all sorts of sexual concerns, the first thing I ask them is, what's your relationship like with pleasure? How much pleasure do you allow yourself to experience? And by pleasure, I don't just mean sexual pleasure. I mean pleasure in general, pleasurable experiences. How much pleasure are you allowing yourself to experience? How much pleasure do you pay attention to? When we are struggling to feel much in the bedroom, if sex is feeling boring, I'm wondering how attuned you are to pleasure and how you're able to cultivate pleasure. We tend to live in a very pleasure-phobic society and culture where pleasure is seen as something sinful and wrong, or it can mean hedonism. And pleasure isn't the same as gratification. We are very bad at allowing ourselves to feel pleasure just for the sake of it. So at the moment, I'm running a 12-day pleasure challenge in my Facebook group for women, for encouraging everyone to pay attention to pleasurable sensations. And this is what I give my clients. I make them do pleasure journals of paying attention to what was pleasurable and then enjoying it and noticing pleasure. I believe that in other areas of our lives, when we have a negative attitude towards our body and about our body, I'm going to take another sip of water, it's so hot in here. I would say that maybe 90% of people experience body shame. And by body shame, as in not liking your body, thinking that you are too fat or too thin, or thinking this is too big or too small. And when you have a very negative attitude towards your body, when you don't feel confident in your body, when you don't feel good about your body, that will affect how you feel about sex, about sexuality, about your sexuality. Especially, I'm thinking with men who experience penis shame, who believe their penises are too small or not enough or not thick enough or not long enough. That will affect how you feel about sexuality. I also think it's your attitude towards nudity. How comfortable do you feel about nudity? How comfortable do you feel nude? A really good example of in Scandinavia and in Northern Europe and a lot of European countries, nudity is just, meh. It is what it is. It's just a naked body. I love using the example of sauna in Scandinavia, where you do sauna or sauna. You do sauna naked, and you do it naked with your friends, with your family. You do it with your co-workers. You do it with your boss. Everyone goes into sauna, and it's not a big deal. Whereas in the UK and the US, we're still very prudish around nudity. And that's something to be mindful of, is that if you are feeling embarrassed around nudity, if you don't like seeing naked bodies, if you think people are showing too much flesh, notice that. Because if you don't feel comfortable nude, if you don't feel comfortable yourself being nude, if you don't feel comfortable looking at nudity in a non-sexualized context, then maybe that might affect how you feel about sexuality. So and also, one thing I want to follow up with is I believe how we do one thing is how we do everything. So often our attitudes towards sex will reflect our attitude towards the rest of our lives as well. There's an idea of in sex, are you the kind of person who tries to get everything done very quickly? Does that happen in sex as well? Or are you somebody who likes to take your time and enjoy yourself and enjoy all the pleasures that can be experienced with that? I'm sure there are a lot of psychological studies that have, how we show up in the bedroom does affect how we show up in the rest of our lives. And sometimes by changing how we show up in the dream can change how we show up in the rest of our lives. I think it does come down to pleasure again. How much pleasure do you allow yourself to experience? How much pleasure do you think you deserve to experience? If we do not like pleasure, if we don't have a very healthy relationship with pleasure, then it kind of goes hand in hand that maybe our relationship to sex may not be what we would like it to be. So I would always tell somebody that if you are struggling with sexuality, the first thing you need to work on is your relationship with pleasure and how much you allow yourself to experience. And there's many different kinds of pleasure which I can go into later. Right, I'm just going to scroll down because Sally has asked me some more questions. How does sex affect our neurology and neurochemicals? Good question. I spoke about this at the talk at Inspiring Talk. So when you are in love and you're in the honeymoon period, your brain is on drugs. So you are on a very high cocktail of dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. They've found that usually after orgasm, our brains released a huge amount of oxytocin, especially in women, which is the bonding chemical, which is why we can feel very attracted and drawn to our partners after we've had sex with them, even if we don't like them very much as people. This is the bonding chemicals, oxytocin. It's not just oxytocin, our brains also release vasopressin, which is another bonding chemical, but is more associated with being territorial and being defensive. So generally, yes, our brains release a lot of different chemicals during sex and after sex. One interesting thing I found, and I need to back this up because I've heard this from a few different sources. Some people have tried to say that semen, apparently ingesting semen is very good for mood. I cannot back this up and I cannot verify this, but I've heard this said that when a woman or somebody ingests semen, it's meant to be very good for mood. Maybe this could be an excuse to go and have sex. I've heard this before. I need to find something to back that up. How can sex affect neurology? I would also say that during sex, when you have all these pleasurable hormones released in the brain and all these wonderful bonding hormones, we know that generally having a long hug every day releases a lot of oxytocin, which is why sex can feel so good because we get that whole oxytocin release. As humans, we need oxytocin. It's the bonding chemical, it's the love chemical. And if you are not able to be sexually active at the moment, whether you're single or celibate or something is not happening, then you want to find another way of getting that oxytocin through physical contact, through touch, through caressing. So let me scroll down. Pleasure is the antidote to anxiety. Yes. Pleasure, in long story short, pleasure is the antidote to anxiety. Because I know I experience anxiety myself, so I'm not just kind of spouting off some random stuff in theory. I know this in person, and I know this from the clients I've worked with. If you are experiencing anxiety or any kind of mental health concern, you will have probably covered, when you are working with a therapist or you're working with a recovery program, they will have talked about the concept of self-care. And in self-care, that's basically doing nice things for yourself to take care of yourself. Pleasure comes into self-care. If you've heard about the concept of a bliss list, for example, where you create a list of everything that makes you feel blissful and pleasurable and yummy, whether it's taking bubble baths, whether it's walking on the downs, whether it's walking your dog, whether it's going for a run, whether it's dancing, whether it's listening to really bad pop music, that might be me, whether it's eating some delicious food, it's doing something every day that brings you pleasure and joy. And when it comes to sexuality, I would say that when you do things that bring you joy and pleasure, paying attention to that, paying attention to the pleasurable sensations. When we are experiencing anxiety, it feels horrible. It feels really nasty in the body. And one way to feel safe in the body, or to learn how to feel safe in the body, is to get used to pleasurable sensations and feel good with pleasure. And it doesn't just have to mean sexual pleasure. It can be having a lovely foot rub or a head rub or having your back rubbed. It can be stroking your cat. It can be enjoying some delicious chocolate. It could be doing some belly dancing, because the more pleasure you allow yourself to experience, the more pleasure you experience. And then this also comes to sexual pleasure as well. So I'm going to go down. Thank you. How can we encourage our partners to talk about sex more? That can be very difficult, especially if we are with a partner who maybe is a little bit more conservative or a little bit more shy than us. I would say, number one, bring it up in a more neutral situation. So, for example, if you are sitting in front of the TV with a glass of wine, you can talk about sex then. One thing I recommend is what we call the shit sandwich, or if you want to talk about sex more with your partner, compliment them and tell them what you love about what they do in the bedroom with you. I really love it when you touch me like this. I really love it when you stroke me like this. I really love it when I'm inside you or you're inside me. And then if you want to make a specific request saying, I would really like it if you could do this more and maybe this a bit less, and then follow up with a compliment again. Whenever you want to talk about sex with a partner, try to avoid criticism. Even if you're really, really frustrated about something they're doing, it's driving you absolutely nuts. You want to avoid criticism, especially in terms of, you do this wrong, this is wrong, you're crap. Because that is going to create a lot of shame, and that's not the way to really create intimacy that you want. You want to frame requests in the positive. You don't want to, when you're talking about sex with a partner, you don't want to be talking about it, let's get this right. Break them into it gently. Don't talk about it all the time. Maybe bring it into conversation and bring it into more casual conversation. Talk about maybe if you see an article in the news or something on the TV and that's around sexuality, just bring that into conversation. I would say that when your partner has a discomfort around talking about sex, that's something that may need to be worked at. And they're not alone in this. Many people experience discomfort talking about sex. Yeah, I find that getting out of my head works better in the bedroom and not overthinking it. Yeah, in a nutshell. When we are experiencing anxiety, and even if we're not experiencing anxiety, we tend to live very much in the head. So we're very overthinking, overanalyzing. I have a lot of clients like this. And is it any wonder that if you are living in your head, if you're constantly overthinking, over-rationalizing, it's going to be very difficult to drop into the body and into that space of pleasure. This is why doing different conscious touch exercises and workshops can be really useful in dropping down into the body. Mindfulness is also a really good tool for this, or what we call bodyfulness, so really tracking body sensations. I've had clients say that one thing they love about sex is that it's their one place they can let go. So I encourage you that practice letting go. So this is why I love doing things like conscious dance, like 5 rhythms, because that's another environment where you can practice dropping into the body and letting go. Does anybody here identify as a control freak? Does anybody here overanalyze and overthink everything and try and control every single outcome? That will affect how you show up in the bedroom, and especially as sex is not something that is necessarily very pretty. We don't look like porn stars when we're in the bedroom necessarily. We can often worry how we're looking, whether we're looking perfect, whether our tits are sagging, whether our bum is hanging the wrong way, whether our stretch marks are showing. And this will affect how we are able to experience pleasure and to really let go. It's something that is something to practice, not just in the bedroom, but outside of the bedroom. That concept of letting go, that concept of dropping into the body, that concept of letting your body talk, letting your body communicate with you. While I believe that sex happens not just in the body, it's mind, emotions, body, energy, and spirit, it starts in the body. And when we are not very connected to our bodies, when we are constantly overthinking, this is when we experience problems. So it's always good to keep paying attention to your body, doing body-based exercises, doing embodiment exercises, doing more dancing, anything to get you back into your body and your felt sense. Criticism destroys the sex life. Yes. I don't know if anybody here has experienced a partner criticizing them in bed, whether your partner laughed at you, whether your partner said something quite hurtful to you. Did it really help your libido? Did it make you feel more close to them? It's a while, even if what your partner's doing is driving you absolutely crazy, try to avoid being personal and being critical in terms of attacking them. You can be very firm about it. At the same time, you don't want them to be, you don't want to let it slide, because that builds up resentment. You can still be very firm in communicating, this is what I need, this is what I want, but trying to avoid being critical, being negative, attacking them, especially attacking who they are as a person, or saying something critical about their body. When you're having an orgasm, you're not able to think about anything else. I would say also that if you are experiencing difficulties with having an orgasm, I've worked with women who've never had an orgasm, or who have really struggled to have an orgasm. A lot of this can come from overthinking. Overthinking, how am I looking, how am I feeling, am I having an orgasm yet, why isn't this coming? A key principle of orgasm is being able to let go, and this also happens with men as well. So you may have heard of early ejaculation or rapid ejaculation. There's also delayed ejaculation, when men can't ejaculate when they want to. And again, this comes back to the principle of being able to let go. And when it comes to letting go, it's, do you feel safe enough to let go? When we experience anxiety, it's pretty safe standard to say we don't feel very safe. The world doesn't feel like a very safe place, which is why we need to keep working with the breathing exercises, with the reassuring ourselves that it is safe, that our bodies are safe. I think it comes down to, does your body feel like a safe space to be in? Does it feel safe to be in your body, to be able to feel pleasure and let go? Something else I do want to reference here. Thank you, Derek. Something I want to reference here, I can't remember where I've talked about this before, but if you are on certain antidepressant medication, this will impact your sexual response and your orgasmic response, especially SSRIs. I think there's a list I can draw up, but there's especially a fluoxetine, venlafaxine, and a few others. These are not very sex-positive drugs, and they will impact you. So you may have noticed that if you started on medication, that you're not coming like you used to, that your libido's taken a hit. That is because of some medications. It's not a reason to stop your medication, but it is bothering. If it is bothering you, you can speak to your GP and ask to change to a different medication, because not all medications do impact. But it is something to be aware of, is that if you are on certain SSRIs and you can't change the medication, be patient with yourself. Your body won't be reacting the way it used to. You won't be experiencing the same kind of sensations you were before. So be aware of that. Is there anything else? Sally, is there anything else you wanted to... I'm going to go back through the questions, because there's something... Thank you so much, Derek. There's something else that Sally asked me. I'm just scrolling up. Here we are. What about if you don't know what you want because you've dried up creatively in the bedroom? You've dried up creatively in the bedroom. So there are lots of remedies to this. There are lots of, oopsie. There are lots of things we can try with this. So the first thing, whoopsie. I've got all these wires over here and they're interacting. If you feel like you've dried up creatively in the bedroom, something that I encourage you to do is to start cultivating your sexual connection with yourself first. A lot of people think that if you're in a relationship or if you're married, that you shouldn't really need to masturbate, that you don't really need to be sexual with yourself because your partner's there for that. No. Your sexuality belongs to you. Your partner's sexuality belongs to them. You don't actually owe your sexuality to anybody. And masturbation and fantasy doesn't replace partner sex. It's an add-on. I kind of think of, is there such thing as too much pleasure? So sometimes a partner may not feel comfortable with you masturbating without them, but at the same time, how much are you able to cultivate your own erotic imagination? So this is why I recommend looking at erotica, reading erotica, watching erotica if this turns you on. You can try out different sex toys in terms of trying out different sensations on the body. I just say that if you're drying up creatively in the bedroom, this is where tantric exercises can be really juicy. And there's a whole reading list that I can recommend, which are different breathing exercises you can do, different hip exercises, basically cultivating your own sexual energy, working with your genitals, working with the whole juicy area. We tend to think of sex as something we just do with a partner, but actually our sexuality is part of who we are. And if you are feeling that you've dried up in the bedroom, that you've lost all your creativity, start connecting with yourself sexually first. And it doesn't just mean that you have to go and buy some new lingerie, or lingerie can be amazing as well. Start really exploring, who am I as a sexual being? What do I fantasize about? How do I show up? What do I actually like? What do I don't like? This is where going to workshops can be really helpful, taking some online courses. I guess I am a big fan of doing tantric exercises and workshops, and discovering what kind of, not just what do I like sexually, but what kind of touch do I like? What kind of touch do I like on my body, and where do I like it? You may want to experiment with maybe some like BDSM or kink. I know a lot of people kind of freak out at the idea of BDSM or kink, especially because they think it's very scary. You may find that after doing a workshop, there's something that you're really into. Here we are, what Sally just said. How can we gain our libido, regain our libido, if we've been in a relationship for a long time? So, how can we regain our libido if we've been in a relationship for a long time? Again, it's number one, cultivating your own erotic connection. If you've heard of Esther Perel, who I talk about a lot, she says that often in relationships we become fused. And when we become fused, it means we merge ourselves so much with our partner that we lose our own identity. So often when you're trying to restart your libido in a relationship, it means you need to develop your own identity again. It doesn't mean separating from your partner. It means starting to have your own life again, pursuing your own interests, cultivating your own personality. Because when there's that slight degree of separateness, that can create a gap of desire again. Again, it's cultivating your own eroticism. It can be finding out what actually does turn me on, and going on a little mission and a little kind of a journey, and finding out what does turn me on, what gets me excited, what do I want. And how can we regain trust of another if we've experienced abuse or trauma around sex? This is a very, very big topic that I think is the subject of another Facebook Live or webinar. Number one, it's feeling safe in your body again. When we've experienced sexual trauma or abuse, and if it's any trauma or abuse, our body doesn't feel like a safe space to be. The most common response in trauma is that you dissociate, or you kind of trip out of your body. This is where doing a lot of exercises and working with a skilled practitioner and learning to feel safe in your body again. And this is where working with somebody who's skilled to then feel safe with having a partner touching you. It means actually going right back to basics and feeling safe with somebody just touching you on the body, just on the arm, without it resorting to sexual touch. Just somebody gently feeling able to let somebody touch you, to let somebody see you again. The journey to healing after sexual trauma is quite long. It can be quite long. And you need to go very gently with yourself. And if you're with a partner who's experienced sexual trauma or abuse, you need to be patient with them. You need to let them know that you're there for them. You need to not push them beyond what they want to do. You need to be aware. I'd say it also really helps if you have experienced trauma, is get some more information about how the trauma response works in the body, so that it kind of helps demystify your body for you, and it makes your body reactions feel less scary. It can be very normalizing to realize that what I'm experiencing in my body is actually a very normal response to trauma. Hang on, new comment. Hi, Anne. Thank you so much, Sally. So if you'd like to connect with me, find me at my website, lucyrowett.com. So I'll put a link in the comments below. Please also join my free Facebook group for women, which is called Liberated, which is a free space to talk about sex and sexuality and relationships. I'm also running a workshop with Anne O'Keefe, who's just joined in February, called Awaken Your Sensuality, which is a sensual women's writing workshop. If you feel that you'd like to work more with me, or there's something that I didn't cover, do get in contact with me either through my Facebook page or my website. You can book a free 30-minute consult with me, and we can discover where we can work well together and whether I can help you with what you're experiencing. So thank you, Sally, for having me in the Anxiety Compass. I'm sorry about all the tech hiccups here. Do get in contact with me. I'll post my links below. Follow me on Facebook, and I'll follow me on Facebook and Instagram. So have an awesome day, and I'm going to stop now. Bye.